Sometimes wishes did come true. Surveying the map of Earth, circa 1936 by the native calendar, the thought suffused Cadet Senior Agent Deirdre Shalara, and for the last days she'd been planning in earnest. This was the big time, a true opportunity to distinguish herself. Who wouldn't take such a gift when handed out on a golden platter? She and her cadets were now members, breveted, of the interior. It was a major coup, and the only galling part was that she couldn't tell her mothers over Ivrovi. Goddess, how she wanted to tell her sisters, but operational security was a must now. At least she had the private knowledge that someday it would matter. An early promotion, maybe, or at least a solid start. Someday she'd be able to tell her father she'd done well, and enjoy a few moments of quiet pride. "Hi, Mums. I just helped the princess out of a tight spot," was right out. Even thinking about it was dangerous. Special Agent Davari was one scary bitch, and she made it abundantly clear that while their aid to Her Highness would be noted at higher levels, they could be sure the agent acting as their next supervisor would be clueless. Professionally, this only made things harder. Any hint they were milking the cock, much less mentioning the incident, would see them assigned to the nearest Rakiri hunting resort. On a nice world. Permanently. No, loose talk about this was out of the question. And thankfully, Special Agent Davari had definitely removed any temptation, because until graduation she was still a cadet, and any cadet who suffered an attack of loose lips would look bad on one Cadet Senior Agent Deirdre Shalara. Just a few months from seizing the Golden Plover, she was not going to have the prize snatched away. But that wasn't the best part. Oh no. Before the holiday, she managed to secure IOTC participation in the next war game. Sure, it was a dubious situation, full of sinkholes, but navigating uncertain situations for Empress and Imperium, that was the soul and center of the interior. This was just a war game, and while there were sinkholes, she only considered free as being important. Chief amongst them was one Professor Thomas Warwick Pelavon. The goddesses only knew what chain of events had taken place to put a human male in charge of the campus IOTC. The announcement had been shocking, at least at first. Men did not run war games and teach tactics, but then men didn't dice up Imperial admirals in the dark either. Oh yes, once you knew Melondi Sandoka was Her Highness, a certain trail of events quietly fell into place, and male or not, Warwick had performed. Any girl in the interior should know how to keep her lips shut, and goddess damned expect that others were doing the same. Whatever had happened, the save credits said there were things she'd never know. Even if there weren't, it was the best way to operate. So she spent Ifrovi on practical matters. She reminded herself to check into the chess club tonight. Warwick was a human, and so she spent part of Ifrovi looking into humans in general. Their tactical and military achievements, their physical prowess, and a crash course on their culture. Of course, that meant getting ribbed by her sisters for watching porn, and a stern talking to from her father. She got past that by explaining she was dealing with a human professor, wanted to ensure top grades before graduation, and hinted that she might be forging connections with students in some powerful houses. That satisfied her mother and shut up her sisters, while she dove into the thorny problem of Professor Warwick. Once she got past the idea of men in charge, the idea of warrior men was a little hot. Even shirtless warrior men. But setting aside such the fairy tale ideas, you were left with one conclusion. Humans were the product of a lethal death world. Logically, an intelligent, technological species shouldn't exist on such a planet, but since humans had somehow beaten all the odds, treating any of them as less than lethal was an invitation to, well, being beheaded like an admiral. Privately, she'd forced herself to start calling Warwick Death and Darkness. It felt ridiculous, but the man had just married a death's head for goddess sake. No, handling Warwick was sinkhole number 1. Sinkhole 2 was the simulation, and while there were only a few spots open for the IOTC girls to participate, she staked a claim to one of the slots and made it stick as Cadet Senior Agent. Pulling rank wasn't something she normally did, but with one term left before graduation, this was a reward, possibly, for years of hard work. A chance to get noticed as an agent by an Imperial Princess, who was now the Imperial Princess. The war game was a pearl beyond price, but only if she did well. And sometimes, wishes did come true. Aside from human culture, she phoned herself at every record on the datanet of Earth's Second World War, analysed every participant, and come up with a wish list. Her first wish, please goddess don't give me Italy, had come true. Her hope to assume the role of the United States was dashed, but as a second pick, Germany. The records on the tiny nation were a gut-wrenching mix, but once you got past those, well, if she couldn't be the princess's ally, at least she could show her mettle as a worthy and capable adversary. And Germany had the best of everything, for the most part. They had deficits, and those would have to be addressed, but they had a good officer corps for their ground, air, and naval services, a good aerospace industry, and a decisive tech advantage. The problems? They had no strategic or tactical assets in quantity. Their suppliers of critical materials could easily be cut off by embargo, and if their troops, best not to think of them as boys, but troops, were better than anyone else's, they were not better than everyone else's. Ideology aside, the German leadership had been focused on short-term gains and suffered massive failures in logistics and tactical doctrine. Their combined arms, such as they were almost entirely devoted to supporting their ground troops, while ignoring the advantages offered by their naval and air components. In short, having taken great swaths of territory, they were ill-prepared to keep it. Well, not this time. Every prominent nation involved in the simulation had advantages and disadvantages. She gauged out scenarios and made plans for whatever might come her way, which brought her to Sinkhole 3. Her Highness. Her Imperial Highness, Kalira Tassu, had been spending her time here at the Academy before coming out as Melondi Sandoka, a second-year student at the Academy. Thanks to the difference in their ages, they shared no classes, nor was Melondi Sandoka in any of the military training cadres. Asking around, the most she come up with was that her first-year cadet, Prindy Amandis, was a close associate of Gumbri Kittrell. Kittrell was in the media club and a friend of Kellogg Guten. According to Amadis, Guten was a close associate with Her Highness, all of which gave her, well, fuck all really. She certainly couldn't afford to lose the simulation, but if she somehow humiliated Her Highness in the process, or somehow got her angry, that could be very bad for the long-term prospects of one cadet senior agent. Princess Kalira was a public unknown. Her mothers were still debating if Her Highness had come out in public during the Ifrovi address, and that was a problem. Giudri wasn't inclined to roll over, and certainly couldn't afford to, but that left the option of trying to win, or trying to win the sim hard. This would be riding the edge of the knife, and one side of the blade offered distinction and notice of Her Highness, while on the other side, if she pissed the woman off. But she had Germany, and Kalira Tassu was ensconced in the island state of Great Britain. They were opposed, and that was that. Fuck it. I'm going to try and win hard. That meant taking steps, the first of which was securing her borders and a nominal ally, and that meant... She sighed and turned to spot the Pezrin in the room. Italy. Tandri Davesh was a capable IOTC member and head of the student council, but in this time and place, she was her second-in-command, codenamed Ribbentrop. Right. Go talk to the Pezrin and set up a meeting. Tandri didn't look happy at the prospect, but Giudri watched it get up, square her shoulders, and head off. If she knew little to nothing about Her Highness, she knew less than nothing about the Pezrin girl. There was plenty of talk about a Pezrin in the student body, not only a non-noble but an alien from the Alliance no less, but gossip was pointless. Practically speaking, there was nothing to go on, which meant... this could go off like... a bomb. Tom Steinberg paced to calm his nerves, wondering what he was going to do with the bomb. He would have left the bomb under Jabba's bed if he knew where she lived. They'd only ever met in person at the bar or somewhere public, and usually at some ungodly hour in the morning. Worse, she knew where he lived. Check that, she definitely knew where he lived. Every time he'd moved since meeting her, she always sent him a picture of himself sitting out front. Just him, though. Never Avi and the pups. Jabba played by the rules, but she always reminded him that she played hard all the same. It was her way of letting him know not to fuck with her. Job security could be a bitch in this line of work. Keep it up and you'll have the calves of a Pezrin, Pat Veery muttered, as she fiddled with a disassembled... something. Tom was sure she was building a detonator of her own. He's shown her a few tricks from a seasoned pro. Glad to hear it. Tom paced a little more, then had an idea as he grabbed the backpack. Come on, let's go get something to eat.
Finally, I'm starving,
she said, pushing away from the table. He didn't know where she put it all. Really, the galaxy was a weird place. Humans. More men than anyone thought was fair, and women. Human girls complained about putting on weight if they ate an extra bean, while every space girl he'd ever met seemed to wolf down more for lunch than he ate in a day, and still looked like a supermodel. Sure, some were fat, but the amount of food required would have filled the buffet at a Golden Coral. I'm thinking buckos. It's a Helcom place and they have those sausage things. It seemed like three things united the galaxy. One was intestines stuffed with organs and meat. The other was Swedish meatballs. Maybe it was because they were such simple recipes, but everyone had their vision. But like hot space girls with breasts, they were ubiquitous. Supermodel alien babes, sausages, and Swedish meatballs. That was the galaxy in a nutshell, and if you thought about it too long, it would probably drive you crazy. Anyways, Tom could totally go for sausages, but that wasn't what he had in mind. But if anyone asked, he and Pat Veary had gone for lunch. As they got in the car and drove off, Tom barely noticed what was going on. Pat Veary had to nudge him several times. The last time with claws, but at long last they got there. Tom rested his head on the steering wheel as he tried to psych himself up. He briefly wondered about digging out his old hit list, but everyone on that list was dead or in hiding. No use. Tom took a deep breath and went inside with Pat Veary. As he sat down, he briefly eyed a family doing normal things, and briefly imagined them taking a face full of nails and burning gas. The skin burning, blistering, tearing, where the shrapnel hit it. For what? Far as he knew, they weren't in the game. They'd done him no wrong, or at least they caused no social ill, as far as he was concerned. Not pissing him off was his own reward. Tom steadied himself by examining the menu and debated between the fried slug balls with a not mesquite but soda sauce, the shredded turoks on bread, and the fresh-baked bagoon with meaty plover sauce was tasty once you picked up the cactus barbs. Well, like a cactus, because apparently it moved during the night. Anyway, it was all kind of tasty, and in the present company, the correct answer was to order all three, plus whatever else. At least there was a lot of money coming in.
Get you something to drink, love?
The little Helcom guy was way too perky for the situation. Tom thought for a minute. Pitcher of Blue Grells. Avi hated when he did this, but there was no way he was doing this job sober. After Pat Veary ordered, the waiter scurried off with a quick, "Be right back." Soon as the pitcher came, Tom sucked down 1 or 2 Blue Grells worth. Well, he couldn't put it off anymore. "There's something I left in the car. If the lizard comes back, order me the bagoon pasta with extra sauce. And, whatever you want too. I'll be right back." No doubt about it, that was what human folks called a bald-faced lie. Taking one more pull on his Blue Grell, he slipped out the door. A minute later, he turned off the ringer on his Omnipad, while buckos faded into the distance behind him. On the whole, Zinchiki felt like she was not having a good afternoon. Despite already eating lunch, the smell of Erbion wafting through the classroom made her stomach rumble. On top of that, she was not Japan, but Italy, and settled with Dasala as her partner. According to the briefing, it seemed Italy could swap sides at a moment's notice, so for the duration of the simulation she was Il Duce, codenamed Mussolini. While Dasala was the reigning monarch in name only, codenamed Umberto. So long as Zinchiki maintained power, she was in control of the nation, but one slip-up and control passed to Dasala. Dasala was not taking it well. On top of that, Tandri Davesh, the head of the student council and Germany's ambassador, was standing over her and trying to look intimidating.
"I'm not defending German technical superiority. I'm stating the fucking obvious."
Davesh was failing. Not that it helped her mood. The one bright side seemed to be that Dasala wasn't enjoying Davesh's demands any more than she was.
"And yet, you appear very interested in our heavy bomber technology. If you wish to discuss an exchange for some of your armor, send over your leader.
She considered flipping her aside into third-degree dismissal, though she knew it would be lost on the woman. Her namesake had an affectation for standing about with crossed arms. And hats. A wide variety of hats. She slowly leaned back in her chair and crossed hers.
I won't waste any more of my time talking to lackeys.
Overall, the effect was a good one. Davesh looked like she was going to have a stroke, and Zinchiki imagined the Shivanti girl collapsing dead at her feet, like a self-serve buffet. Unfortunately, though much to the woman's credit, the look of anger passed. It was ill-concealed, but a credible effort.
Fine, but this is in your interest too. You need us more than we need you. So you keep saying.
She let her aside flip into second-degree derision. It just felt good.
You have our permission to go.
Davesh's smile looked like two tectonic plates grinding together before departing, which lifted her spirits immeasurably. I never liked that girl. Desala stared holes in the departing ambassador's back, and I have absolutely no idea how Kamara manages to put up with her on the student council. Politics was a thorny concept, like a pathfinder managing a warband, constantly smoothing over family disagreements while seeking advantageous deals with outsiders. For a family, such skills were sensible. The idea of scaling matters up into a more communal agreement felt like getting something sticky in her fur. While understandable, that didn't make it nice. According to my records, if we join forces with Germany, then things are going to go very badly for us. Desala held up her omnipad. On top of that, we've just invested over 200,000 troops into a province called Ethiopia, which has no strategic value and no resources to speak of. That's a huge portion of our ground forces for no return whatsoever. Sinchiki considered the information for a moment. Of all her academy allies, Desala Serhat was the most taciturn. Competent with computers and security systems, the girl was dour, terse, and caustic, keeping others at a distance. Although the girl's disposition was admirable, Zinchiki had remained aloof as a sensible precaution. A predator that announced themselves casually was no less a predator, and Desala's battlegrounds of choice were not hers. Provoking a fight would be pointless. But now...
There would be merit in working together,
Zinchiki offered, tasting the idea,
instead of alternating control.
Desala set her omnipad aside casually and cocked her head. Truce? The closest word in Pesh was direct, an offer to let the other party carve if you got the first choice on the meat. As a tacit offer, the truce acknowledged they were not friends but did not have to be adversaries. It was a reasonable proposal. The alternative of losing their autonomy as the pawns of another held no appeal.
Truce.
Zinchiki offered her fist and was pleasantly mollified when Serhat bumped it with her own.
Shall we compare plans?
Gore looked around his room and stretched. It was a new day in the House of Stone Mountain. Well, afternoon, really, but it was pleasantly cool outside, and slipping into his room for a nap had sounded too good to pass on. There wasn't any furniture as yet. Well, none that he wanted to sleep on. The place had been a menthol house, after all, and a lot of the stuff needed to be tossed out or disinfected with a flamethrower, but that was a job for another day. The rooms had tiled floors, so a basic level of clean was fine. The girls had hauled out everything from his room first. It was good to be the male, and after dipping into the last of their petty cash to buy some thick cushions and air mattresses that promised they were claw-proof from a second-hand Rakiri shop, he plunked his ass down in a sunny spot by the window. The rest was nap history. It was a funny feeling. Naps had never really been his thing, since it was easy enough to sleep when you wanted between jobs, and a couple of times a week he usually managed to slip in next to one of the girls for some fun before an exhaustive sleep, but this was different. Instead of a bunk on whatever ship they were taking, or some hotel where they camped up between jobs, this was his room in their house. It sounded kinda nice, and he rolled over, half awake, and let the sunny patch warm his back. Alright, Shill was hot as a dayside sauna on Pesh during the summer, but now that the wet season was over, the winter was pretty nice. If you wanted your temperature of choice on Pesh, that meant migrating east or west. Well, that and a fight to the death with the warband laying claim to that particular patch of land, or a lengthy application if the city or town has some sort of alliance with your family. There were treaties and pathfinders. The whole cannibalism thing was fine, if you were stuck on one tidally locked planet, where everyone clung to any scrap of land suitable for farming, grazing, or hunting. But over the years, Gore had gradually resigned himself to the truth.
We really fucking love takeout.
His stomach rumbled at the thought, but it wasn't time to eat. Not yet, anyway. On the whole metabolism scale of major species, Shovanti pretty much topped the charts. Those purple gals could put away the food without gaining a pound. If you actually did see a fat Shovanti, that was someone who worked for it. Rakiri came down the list under the Shovanti, and farther still were the Helcom, who seemed to eat about as much as humans and never gained weight, but didn't have much stamina. Gore's stomach rumbled. As far as he was concerned, the Pezra metabolism and his ability to pack away a good dinner fit right in between the Shovanti and the Rakiri, who were alright, as long as you didn't have to deal with the whole carrion thing. But nobody was perfect. Sure, people whispered about the whole cannibalism thing, but everybody, except humans, had grown up on the nice planets. It was pretty much ceremonial these days, but what part of Omnivore was unclear. They had no idea what it was like coming from a world where starvation was a given, or grabbing your next calories could be a matter of life and death, so fuck 'em with a capital ship cannon right up the ass. Bunch of judgmental bitches. Anyway, that was the other nice thing about living on Shill. Most folks were used to seeing all sorts of species, but most folks had never heard about Pezran. Outside of the Alliance, his race wasn't all that well known, so you didn't get the cheap wisecracks you got on the streets back there.
We are your gods, my svelte hairy ass, he muttered. They deserve what they got.
Here in the Imperium, the dominant races for the Foe and Fangs Club were the Rakiri, and maybe sort of the Cortica. Most folks on the street didn't know Pezran, and that was just fine. Anyway, the whole nap thing was kind of nice too. A whole room to himself. He'd never had that kind of luxury on a starship, so maybe this whole home ownership thing would... There was a faint echo, somewhere between a thud and a muffled crump, but Gore's sleep-addled mind told him to relax because RPGs were never that quiet.
Whee! Grab the bucket!
The scream from downstairs sounded like Shrek, and Gore opened one eye. He had a job to do early tomorrow, like early. Couldn't a guy get just a few winks before...
What bucket? We didn't buy a bucket.
And that was Sash. Gore opened both eyes and tried to focus. Nobody was shooting, so how bad could it be?
Fucking marsupials! They're in the house!
And that was Ratch. Gore was instantly awake and already at the door when his thoughts caught up. Already armed with the hold-up pistol he kept under his pillow, he listened at the door for gunfire. There was none, but his ears picked up a stifled whoosh sound, along with a grinding gung, gung, gung that rumbled through the walls. That didn't sound promising. Ducking out, he slipped to the end of the hall and peered down to the chaos below. The girls were running around while Ratch threw herself across the room, waving her rifle toward the basement door. Crap. Setting up as fixers was fine, but maybe that Jara Felso character had already heard something. A preemptive strike to take them all out. That was the kind of shit they were supposed to pull. Gore pelted down the stairs at a run and threw himself to the side of the doorframe, ready to cover the girls while backing up Ratch. The bucket thing was kind of weird, but who knew?
I had eyes on Free,
Ratch said, as she panned her rifle down the stairs looking for targets. Gore took a quick look, but didn't see anything, though fair enough. Ratch was packing a Gash Track 650, which was almost strong enough to punch through thermocast and could turn you into an instant pot roast, and anyone in their right mind who saw her coming would hide too.
I've got the stairs, Gore,
Ratch said hoarsely, while he heard the other girls behind him.
One got past me on the stairs and ran into Sash's room.
Well, that was all he needed to hear, and he bounded away. The men's house wasn't fancy, but it was big. The whole place had 8 bedrooms, which made it comfortable for a large Shovanti family, but the old earner turned a lot of the extra rooms into squats, where Mempheds getting their groove on could have some private space. Upstairs was alright, but the girls had carved out rooms for themselves on the first floor where they could keep watch outside the house. There was no telling if old customers would think the place was open for business, and none of them wanted to deal with calling the cops or getting noticed right after moving in. Pausing just outside Sash's door, Gore took a quick listen and was rewarded by the sound of rustling off to the left. Rather than turning things into a standoff, Gore dived inside and rolled, coming up in a shooter's stance to open fire. The pouchadillo digging through the wastebasket looked at him and hissed. Tom walked around the classroom, listening to the heated discussions, mulling over the turn to end out the year. Things had not gone off with a boom, a bang, or any other sort of international catastrophe, though the afternoon had seen some heated discussions going on in the study rooms. One problem was the program. Hearts of Iron 6 was an incredible game, and the studio had given it their all, adapting programming from popular Shulvanti wargame to the task. The political model and the tech tree was a bit old school, using updates from HFY 5, but as a combat sim it was outstanding. Essentially a mod from some planetary invasion game, Hearts of Iron 6 modeled tactical and strategic detail right down to unit morale, supply, and even the weather. And right now the program was doing what it did best, waiting for someone to trip the conditions where the declarations of war would fall like dominoes. Everyone understood what the game was about, even if he'd added on a few victory conditions. Those with the most would win. They were Shulvanti, and you might as well ask an Italian to talk without using their hands. Building empires was culturally ingrained. It came to them as naturally as breathing, and yet 1936 passed quietly. Well, for the most part, there was a Pezran in the mix. Sinchiki and Asala had split their efforts, ploughing points into improving Italian industry and R&D. While the girls had fussed at each other over the tankette, which Dasala saw as sort of an exo, they eventually agreed it wasn't a good use of resources. Privately, that smacked of reading ahead, but he couldn't fault them. Politically, though? As Mussolini, Zinchiki was listening to Germany. More accurately, she was standing there Gidri and Tandri, letting the Germans talk while she said nothing and promised less. She was there, and the Germans wanted a secure southern border, yet as King Umberto, Dasala was busy talking to Melondi and Desi in England. It was pissing them off. Sinchiki claimed it was all a matter of trade deals, but even as Italy refused any alliance, the pair pumped political points into Ethiopia and graciously offered an interim government toward Ethiopian independence. The language was Dasala at work, and sounded a lot more like the peace talks with Cambria. But the program's AI was buying it. Just. Meanwhile, Zinchiki was looking at Yugoslavia on the map like it was the last chicken leg. Over in Japan, Prindi and Saizen signed an alliance with Germany, then largely ignored it. They were keeping themselves busy poking the Chinese Civil War that was raging between Pris and Veris. Nothing new there, as events were going down the expected path. Keeping Zinchiki out of Japan had been the right idea. A repeat of Japanese India seemed unlikely, though she'd eat anything with curry. Under Gidri and Tandri, Germany was proving to be an education. Although she shot some evil looks at Italy, Tandri as Ribbentrop seemed happy with forging the Japanese alliance. Gidri, on the other hand. Tom wasn't sure what to make of the cadet senior agent, but the girl had done her homework, and the sim hadn't even been homework. She wasn't even in his class, but she clearly put in the time for some serious research to understand how everything was in play. He wasn't sure what that boded for dealing with her in the IOTC classes, but for now... As leader of a unified Germany, her first actions had been coming straight to him to discuss the Jewish question. Launching into a polite but intense, not quite demand, she expressed dissatisfaction with the ridiculous loss of available population that was draining her economic and military power. Tom replied that while her attitude was commendable, the Nazi Party had swept into power based upon an internally consistent dogma, and a dramatic change of course was not going to happen. That little exchange had felt vile, but there it was. Nazi Germany was going to have to deal with the drain because otherwise Gidri lost her mandate for power. That was something she understood. After all, the Empress wielded supreme executive power as a mandate from the masses, and Hitler nodded once, thanked him for his time, and walked off. Right over to Melondi. Half an hour later, Hitler announced a deal to relocate German Jews to British Palestine. While deeply suspicious, Melondi and Desi opted for the promised bump in economy and population as a counter to the Arab revolt, while Gitri announced the Jewish relocation would be paid for through terms of conscripted service. After Tom recovered from the surprise, he had to assign Germany 4 more divisions. Then Gitri tore up the Treaty of Versailles by reforming the Luftwaffe. The background on the Nazi flag was now purple. And not much else. Angling for the advantage of alliances was the order of the day, and hampered by the lack of any triggers. Most of the world sat back and watched. England produced the first Spitfires and Wellington bombers, while over in the US, Jacksmy put the B-17 into non-wartime production, while Cephas signed treaties with France and the British Empire. Otherwise, 1936 passed without a shot fired. Italy left Ethiopia, everyone stayed out of Spain, and as far as the Sim was concerned, the world was somewhat nicer? Everyone with the available points is pumping them into their R&D for all they're worth, which means the peace is just time to properly arm. Every group besides Italy is looking at Russia and China like a buffet, but without the trigger conditions, looking is all they can do. Everyone understood the mechanics, and with the first year over, Tom called it good for the day. They would get through 3 years tomorrow. In the meantime, I have my first class in Iaido tonight. The Rhythm Kiss to check on, and please to any deity listening in, help Lani safely through her operation. On the whole, at least things have been
a fucking fiasco.
That was the thought running through Gore's mind, though he didn't dare saying so out loud. The girls were nearly in tears, which was so rare that he didn't dare even think it hard, in case it showed in his face or a sack, but still.
All I wanted was a nap, but no! Fuck that! I still have to pick off the Duchess's target if we want to have the credits to do wild and silly things like eat!
The Imperial credit was a wonderful thing. Generally used by electronic transfer, it was as easy as confirming your biometrics with any transaction. Unless, of course, you were getting paid to roast someone, take out a competitor's gambling den to send them a message, maybe hit a trafficking ring and make off with the cash, or any number of other acts of ultraviolence that a government frowned on as illegal, untidy, upsetting to the general public, made the cops look bad, or all wrapped up in the same package. Another great thing about the credit was you could put them on charge sticks and carry them around as encrypted currency. Up to 5,000 credits per stick was just to be about right for any traveller. For physical currency, the sticks were what you needed for moving assets between star systems, or accepting backhanders for any crime you might have committed as a paid consultant. You might have to launder them a bit before hitting something traceable, but that was just the cost of doing business. The problem was that when your assets were mostly off-planet and stashing currency sticks to avoid government notice, you could end up being screwed for money. Like when you decided not to go back and opted to do things like buy a house. Then your distant stashes of cash weren't worth a damn, and you had to raise some local money fast. Not that he gave a crap. It was a living, and most of their work was kind of a public service. Tug mother, the cops usually ended up taking credit for the trafficking victims that got freed. Who cared if a couple of the slavers got a flechette round through their brain pan? As far as he was concerned, the bitches all deserved it for what they were doing, so it was work you could feel good about. Becoming fixers, though, that needed some adjusting to. Much like their new house. So, Ratch had gone down into the basement and scared up a nest of pouchadillos that had been making themselves at home. Fine. Well, not fine. She'd taken a shot at one of them and hit the water main, which promptly started turning the basement into a swimming pool. Ratch charged back upstairs to escape the steam from lasgun-heated water, followed by at least one of the pouchadillos, the bitch who hissed at him and had been going through the garbage in Sash's room, and they splurged for creamed fish sandwiches yesterday. Sash hadn't finished hers, and now the remains were all over the walls, along with remains of the pouchadillo. That was sort of a sponge and mop job. Well, plus fixing the hole and repainting. At least he'd been packing a slug thrower instead of his favourite, but sleeping with powered handguns was never a good idea. One glitch and you were lucky if you just lost an ear, so one perforated pouchadillo later, and he was back in the living room. Sash and Shrek spent 5 minutes screaming at Ratch about shut-off valves. Ratch screamed at Sash and Shrek that this wasn't a fucking spaceship, and if they knew what a water valve looked like, they could damn well turn it off themselves. Gore stood in the basement with them. After all, a guy had to hang with his girls, no matter how deep shit got. By the time they found the shut-off valve, the shit, or more exactly the water, was about a foot deep. Gore stood in the swirling morass of old basement dirt, cobwebs, and assorted garbage. Shrek shoved away one of the dead pouchadillos with the butt of her rifle, and it bobbed over and kept washing against his knees. Sash was looking pissed, he was sopping wet, and while she'd been in love with the idea of owning the house, Ratch looked like she was on the edge of breaking down. So much for their first day in the new house. At least it was only a foot of water, and the basement was cast masonry. It would pump out, though a bucket wasn't going to cut it. Then there would be the plumbing repairs, if they wanted to have, say, water? Or maybe a hot shower. Baths weren't big on his list, though after a couple of days you needed a serious grooming. But now, with dead pouchadillos swirling against his knees, the idea had serious merit. The thing smelled awful and... Gore frowned.
Why is it swirling? Well, he's not doing the backstroke.
Shrek elbowed Ratch in the ribs.
You got him pretty good. No, I mean, why is it swirling?
Gore waved at the water around his calves, which burbled and eddied.
There were like, what, 2 or 3 floor drains down here? That's nowhere near fast enough to...
Then the floor collapsed under his feet. The idea had been brilliant, and Tom Steinberg really hoped it would work. It had struck him as he walked around the workshop area, scoping out the security. There was one guard up the street by the... Yes, that was it. The bathroom off the side of the hangar. Tom shifted the backpack hanging from his shoulder as he beelined to the men's can. That was his salvation. This was how so many people didn't get blown up. It wasn't like the place was used. No self-respecting Shilvanti guy would go within a mile of the thing. No padlock required. Just tuck it under a sink or whatever, set the timer, and forget about it. At least, that was how Tom hoped it would work anyways. In theory, it should work, since this was a smaller bomb he'd filled with nuts, bolts, screws, and various mechanical fasteners, each personally sanded in a tumbler to remove any fingerprints. Hell, he'd even let them mix in a bleach marinade just to get rid of any DNA. When that timer reached 0, each of them would become a little flying knife, and that was where the bathroom came in. As Tom propped the backpack up on the toilet, he looked at the 4 walls of the stall. Would they be enough to absorb the bulk of the shrapnel? Admittedly, whatever made it through the walls of the stall would be absorbed by the walls of the bathroom, but he doubted anybody in here would be in any better shape. He set the timer according to the instructions and walked back out, trying not to look like he was eyeing the security. As he got in the grav car and drove off, he sent every prayer he knew upstairs, asking for nobody to be hurt. He prayed so long and hard that he just started sending up lyrics from whatever was playing over the net, but God would know what he was reaching for. There was a parable about that, and it washed up on the shores of his memory. And through villages of ether, oh, my crucifixion comes. Will you sing my hallelujah? Will you tell me when it's done? Once upon a time, Tom had believed life was just a mean joke. Some tempting morsel to be yanked away, just as soon as anything good happened. He never cared if he lived or died. He was just life's little sacrificial lamb, without even the martyr complex. It was just what it was. Of course, when you lived a life of constant pandemonium, you tended to get a little messed up. You saw things, maybe a little too much. And you could throw yourself into the arms of your chemical love until you didn't need to see them anymore. Anyways, he'd found new meaning in his life, but now that feeling of meaningless was coming back. Damn jabber. People like you fuck people like me in order to avoid suffering. Paying me for it isn't making it right, so maybe just blowing up a commode and calling it quits is the right way to start, so fuck you, jabber! Damn. Rabbi Solomon was pretty smart. There was only one person he hated more than Jabber. One living person, anyway.
Fuck you, Jabber!
Tom roared into the dashboard.
I'm coming for you!
He seethed as he pulled back into the Bucko's parking lot. Pat Veary needed to be picked up, and she'd probably be pissed off at him for ditching her in the restaurant like that. She'd probably eaten her way for his credit chip, but fuck it. The rabbi was right, and it was time to make things right. Starting with the bitch who'd been enabling him every single fucking time.
You're gonna die, Jabber!
Pat Veary sat up in the back seat.
Who's Jabber?